Hello, everyone. This is Ahmed Shabar, and thank you for tuning in. We will be live with Uzair Younus, who is one of the directors, who is the director at the Pakistan Initiative at the Atlantic Council, and he is also working on a project called Dhamiri, and he has a background in finance and economics and law and diplomacy. And today we'll be discussing how high level climate dialogue or international climate dialogue is impacting investments in Pakistan, considering that Pakistan is one of the most vulnerable countries to the effects of climate change. And if there is any flow of investments in Pakistan in the name of climate change, whether it's even like helping a country like Pakistan, and what the global North's responsibility is. So I won't take like more time with the introductions, and I'll just invite Uzair on right now. Hello, Uzair. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
Of course, no. Thank you for coming on. And we recently met, and you just mentioned that you're the director at the Atlantic Council, and that gave me the idea, and especially with COP26 just passing by, that like this is a conversation that we need to have with somebody who does and like who understands how finances work and how law and international diplomacy and everything work. So thank you for giving me the time, and coming onto the environmental. I believe like you also run your own podcast as well, right? Have you had this conversation over there too?
I hosted Dr. Adil Najam a while ago to talk about a whole host of issues, including climate change and how Pakistan should be thinking about this. And then I had this guest, he's an author called Jamie Arbib. They just put out, I think it's been over a year now, this interesting book about sort of the revolutions taking hold around the world, particularly at the
Hmm.
cutting edge of technology. So we talked about S-curves related to clean energy, battery storage, etc., which directly link up with our global climate change challenge.
Hmm.
And that was an interesting conversation because it got me thinking about the opportunity that developing countries like Pakistan have, primarily
Hmm.
because जो infrastructure है हमारा,
Hmm.
it still needs to be built out. It still needs a lot of investment just to get up to
Hmm.
par, so to speak. So
Hmm.
because we don't have a lot of legacy baggage holding us back in infrastructure, energy systems, etc., um,
Hmm.
that is a leapfrog opportunity, which means
Hmm.
that as these technologies mature, as more financing gets unlocked, as the world takes the climate change challenge more seriously, Pakistan can leapfrog. And I think that to me is the developmental opportunity more so than anything else.
Hmm. So we'll discuss the leapfrog of like opportunity in a bit. Before we like get there, I just want to very quickly for the uninitiated, like I mean, like if somebody still doesn't know why climate change is important and why finance is important, I would imagine they'd be living under a rock. But at the same time, this platform is of course to try and reach out even like to as many people as possible. So I wanted to ask, what does a climate fund mean, and why is it needed? You basically just mentioned a few things, but why do you think climate finance is important at this point in time, and especially
I mean,
why now?
yeah, I mean, look, it's important for a variety of reasons, and I can, for those that may not be following this development as deeply as perhaps you and I are, maybe think back to the post World War II era, and there were two examples that sort of two things that happened, right? One was the development of the Bretton Woods system, which created things like the IMF, and the Marshall Plan was a part of it, which basically unlocked funding for war-torn Europe, right? So the rebuilding of Europe happened by
Mhm.
unlocking that money flow. The second thing that happened during that same era, so to speak, was sort of this funding of agricultural investments in places like
Yeah.
India, Pakistan, the Green Revolution, as we grew up to call
Mhm.
it, right? uske andar seeds technology, new farming techniques, funding for all of that, development of new canals, irrigation systems,
Right.
etc.
Yeah.
All of that was unlocked to not to just develop these countries, but primarily to deal with the issue of famine and food insecurity in
Mhm.
this part of the world, right? Like if you remember, or if we remember our grandparents' stories, at least I remember,
Yeah.
filled with harrowing thoughts about food shortages that would happen because the crop failed and things like that. We still have food issues, but we don't have famines anymore in our part of the world, primarily because of those investments. So today, fast forward to 2021, the challenge facing the world is climate change, and that impacts everything from your water systems to your food systems to your energy systems. And so we need investments, not only to deal with this challenge in a way that improves the resiliency of our systems, and we can talk about what does resiliency mean, but more importantly, it's a challenge for developing economies because the old model of dirty industrialization, if we all go down that route in the way the Western world and the global North did, then we will
Mhm.
destroy the environment, right? Because at the end of the day, Pakistan's carbon emissions per capita are nothing compared to Germany and the United States and other parts of the world. And
Mhm.
even India's are nothing. And we, because we are underdeveloped, did not play a role in the climate disaster that is coming or that is here
Mhm.
already. But
Mhm.
that means that we need to think differently about our own developmental trajectory, because if another 1.5 billion people of the subcontinent develop in the same way and economically progress in the same way that the West did 50, 60, 70 years ago, then the
Mhm.
world will be a much worse place. And
Right.
our environment will be a much worse place. Our societies will get destroyed. So that's why we need to think about climate change in that
Mhm.
context.
Okay, so that answered the first part of my question, right? So, we need finances and funds to basically counter all the effects of climate change, and basically safeguard against, like as you mentioned, famines or other food shortages or other, developmental issues. But why now? Why is this conversation starting just now? And do you think that Pakistan, like countries like Pakistan, fully understand what challenges we are facing? Because um, for the global like I get the feeling that even the global north doesn't exactly understand the challenges that they're facing. Like, especially considering that Trump recently moved, got out of the Paris Agreement, and then the US came back into the Paris Agreement. So, do you think that the world even understands the challenge that we're facing right now, and that they understand why we need to support it?
I think human beings in general are very bad at dealing with upcoming crises until the crisis is upon us. I
Mhm.
think at a micro level we may understand some things that are happening, but at a societal level it takes us a long time to deal with major challenges. And but then when we do, as a species, then the power we bear to deal with those challenges is also phenomenal, right? So that's sort of the at a philosophical level, the tragedy
Mhm.
of our species is that हमें बड़ा time लगता है चीजें
Uh,
समझने में. Now, when in terms of when we look at where the U.S. is, for example, even in the U.S. the conversation, you're right about Trump, but since Trump, the conversation is beginning to shift. There is a recognition even among Republicans that this is a problem, and it'll take
Mhm.
some time for them to fully get around to it. For us in Pakistan, the upside is that this is not a polarizing, in despite all the polarization in our
Mhm.
politics, climate change and the disaster that is coming. And the risks Pakistan faces are, broadly speaking, a fact that everyone across the political spectrum agrees on. And even
Mhm.
at the individual level, when you go and talk to a fisherman in Manora, they know more about climate change than perhaps you and I do, because they've seen
Mhm.
the change of fishing patterns, the change of water temperatures, and the impact
Okay.
that has had in what they catch and what they don't. I
Mhm.
vividly remember very early on that when the tsunami came in East Asia,
Mm-hmm.
And my friend was big into fishing at that time, and he would go to like in Balochistan to go fishing. And he remembered telling me that, I heard something interesting from these fishermen because they started seeing new shoals of fish that have come there because of the tsunami, right? So that fisherman may not fully appreciate what the tsunami meant and what
Yeah.
happened beyond the fact that a lot of people died, but he appreciated and understood that it had caused a
Ah.
change,
Hmm.
right? So I think people understand it. We get it.
Hmm.
The challenge now is to channel this micro level understanding into a macro level policy framework and
Hmm.
execution proactively. Now, to your question about why now,
Hmm.
why now? Because I think we're reaching this inflection point globally where extreme weather events have become the norm. Wildfires from Greece to California are happening every year. In Australia, bigger, bigger, bigger all the time.
Hmm.
Hurricanes are getting bigger, storms are getting bigger. This year, just alone, right? I think we hit wet bulb temperatures in Jacobabad and another part of
Yeah.
India.
Hmm.
We saw monsoons stretching into late September. We've
Hmm.
seen monsoons move north and west with increasing ferocity. So all of those things, I
Hmm.
think, are making people sit up and take notice about the fact that, hey, the weather patterns and the events that we grew up with 30, 40 years ago are no longer the
Hmm.
same. And why is that happening? And now we know enough to say this is climate change and we should do something about it.
Hmm. And yeah, like I agree with what you're saying, that the fisherman probably appreciates that something is changing, but like they perhaps don't know the jargon, but like it's like I guess that's one of the things that the climate finance can address, is to basically get the message to the masses, so that everybody can get on board together at the same time. And I really do hope that people over here are starting to appreciate that climate change is a real issue, and it's not more because there's a fund attached to it at this point in time. Because sometimes like the that's where the concept of greenwashing comes in as well. That like as soon as money gets involved, people are like, oh, okay, so like this is a topic that we need to talk about. Anyway, so and that's going to be like a question for later as well. I wanted to ask. We spoke about the Paris Agreement, and COP26 just like pass us by. And COP26 is also like very widely considered to be a bit of a failure, because not like there's still some ifs and buts, and there isn't a direct commitment of finances. And it's also considered a failure because I believe China didn't attend COP26. And then how, like, what legitimacy does the Paris Agreement hold when countries like the US could just leave and then get back in? And I don't know, they could probably just decide to leave again tomorrow. So, is this dialogue even, like, does this dialogue even hold weight? And are the finances promised within, like these dialogues? Are, like, I believe by 2025, they're saying, like, the US pledged to raise $100 billion like a year towards these ends, and by 2030 we need like a hundred, like $850 billion. So do you think these dialogues actually hold weight, and like at all?
Yeah, I mean, look, the Paris commitment after the Paris Accords was about 100 billion in funds a year, right, from the
Yeah.
countries in the north, global north. That has not been met. I think currently it's about 80 billion, and they're
Yeah.
promising that before 2025 we will meet this target and then some more. Um, Look, 100 billion was not met. There's two ways to look at it. I look at the glass always half full in the sense that 100 was committed, 80 is flowing. So, okay, we have a shortage of 20, and it took us a long time to even get to 80, but it's still better than zero, right?
Yeah.
And if we get to 100 in 2025, maybe let's say 2024, and try to get above that and even then some more, that's better than not, right? And I think on the COP side, I believe that Xi Jinping did not attend, but I think the Chinese were there. I may be wrong on that, but
Mhm.
I think there were talks between the US and China on the sidelines of this as well. The one interesting thing that to me came out of that was this proposal to fund, I think, roughly $8 to $9 billion worth of investments in South Africa to wean its energy system off of coal. I think that might be super interesting in the sense that if South Africa can do it with this type of funding and pull it off and sort of be more carbon neutral in its energy systems, then that's a
Mm,
blueprint that other emerging markets can also follow, right? So I think we have to look at it. Now, to your broader question about the US leaving and the issues, I think, look, we have to be comfortable with the fact that climate change is going to be a subject that will be significantly impacted by the vagaries of domestic politics. Now, what do I mean by that? The fact of the matter is that as the climate challenge gets more and more serious, its impact in human terms on societies will make these societies more volatile in terms of their domestic politics, right? So,
mm,
populism, issues related to underdevelopment, the temperature literally will go up, but figuratively will go up in terms of polarization. And we're seeing this
mm.
across societies. You cannot and, the migration challenges, people coming from El
Yeah.
Salvador, Guatemala will increase, so that will impact places like the US, etc. I think as that happens, you will see that politically speaking, systems will be in a state of flux. And when domestic political systems will be in a state of flux, that will obviously have an impact on multilateral forums to negotiate not only climate change accords, but everything else in geopolitics at the UN level, etc. So we have to be comfortable and okay with that. I think that the conversation should move faster than
Mm,
where it is currently. I think the funding challenge is significantly larger, but at the end of the day, countries like Pakistan should also not wait for somebody else to fund everything for us. I think there are a lot of things that we as Pakistani society can do on our own to unlock
mm.
financing, to unlock projects, to think about what kind of energy systems, what kind of water systems, what kind of agricultural systems we want for tomorrow, for our coming generations. And I think, generally speaking, Pakistanis have been prone, our society for various reasons has been prone to dealing with crises, one crisis after another. That
Mm,
impacts our ability to not think long term. But in
mm,
this case, I think we should be thinking long term, and we should have our own perspective on what are the things we need to invest in to make sure that we not only deal with this challenge, but in
yeah.
a way build an economy that thrives in the era of climate change.
Yeah. Like I agree. I said like that's what my next question is as well. That what do you think the impact of these dialogues is on countries like Pakistan or lesser developed countries, especially considering that um, people aren't or like the like it doesn't really look like people are very serious about actually getting things done. Like just before entering, we were having that conversation that like sure there like there's a billion tree tsunami concept going on, but at the same time, during winter there isn't any gas like available. So like there's a huge shortage of gas. So like and at the same time, some of that gas was actually used to what's it called, fuel vehicles, whereas there's no gas in the kitchen and everything to cook food. So do you think the these dialogues will actually change the perception like Pakistanis have about climate change and how to manage their energy resources and how to actually move with the climate movement?
I mean, look, the on the impact of the dialogue, I don't know the answer to that, but let me just think about how this may work, right? So let's say Pakistani bureaucrats and people from the climate change ministry go to Glasgow, and they sit there and engage with people from around the world, particularly the global south, to see, at least have conversations around what's going on. That in and of itself will increase their understanding of the challenge, not only the challenge globally, but also what are other people doing, what are some of the solutions, what are innovations around financing and projects and technology and things like that that we can perhaps learn from. So I think at bare minimum, just being present is a learning experience.
Mm,
At a societal level, Does that bleed into understanding? Maybe, maybe not. But I don't even think we need to have this topic permeate at a societal level. I think if it permeates at the governance levels
Mm,
and leads to better execution of new projects, I think that's a success. And then I think from a overall point of view, your point about gas and is not being there and forestation, I don't think those are mutually exclusive either, right? Like I understand the need to critique the billion tree tsunami for what it is. I don't think it's greenwashing. I think it's still important in terms of restoring
mm,
forest cover in Pakistan, and at least brings a, to your point about does that impact how people think about things. Billion tree tsunami, let's be honest, I think
mm,
has largely driven at least a base level understanding of what the problem is, and we need to do something about it. So at least people are doing something there, right? It's a starting point. Um, how does that link with lack of gas, and then people burning firewood because either kerosene is too expensive or gas is not coming or it's too expensive, etc., etc.
mm,
That's a broader conversation around our energy problem.
mm,
And I think it would be a shame for us to conflate everything together, in the sense that you can keep doing the billion tree tsunami on one hand,
mm.
and not do anything on your energy system side, and that would be a shame. But then saying that because you're doing billion tree tsunami and you failed on the gas side, therefore the billion tree tsunami point is also invalid. I think that's conflation, right? So we need to parse those things out. It's the
Right.
same thing with like the dam debate, right? That we have, which is, are you building mega dams for solving a
Mm,
water security challenge? Will that even solve it? I don't think so. I
mm,
think there's a lot of science that says mega dams will, in an era of climate change, actually are not going to be as good as investments in redeveloping our aquifers in the Indus Valley,
mm.
drip irrigation, things like that. But you cannot say that you don't need any dams either. You do. You need water
Right. Yeah.
storage solutions as well. So I think we need to like have a more nuanced view on things like that as well.
Mm. I agree, but then that leads me to the next question, which is, are we do you think is the Pakistani government um, trying to spend on on weaker infrastructure? Like, are we trying to manage our gas shortages, for example, because it's been going on for quite a while now. Similarly, there are political, what's it called, parties that are now talking about the lack of water in terms of climate change. For example, a friend from KPK was just recently telling me that from one of the rivers, like the water has gone down by about 8 cusecs, and everybody's all of a sudden talking about climate change. Um, but that water, like the 8 cusecs didn't drop, it didn't drop down 8 cusecs in just one go. It's been happening for quite a while. So we weren't spending on our infrastructure, very obviously, and we were, more looking at large dams, etc. So do you think Pakistan is now getting serious about spending on these weaker infrastructure, and are the investments flowing in like through the climate dialogue as well to help Pakistan face those challenges?
Yeah, I think there's still a big gap that needs to be filled. I mean, even when you look at, let's say, across the border into India, a significantly larger economy, but their climate change strategy has been, in a way, far more nuanced and far more multi-pronged than Pakistan's, in the sense that it's relied on clean energy production. They're talking about, excuse me, clean
That's it.
energy production. They're talking about things related to battery storage. They're talking about electric vehicles, not only talking about these things, but actually driving policy to increase the adoption of that, right? So I don't know if you may have seen over the last few months, Ola, which is a ride-hailing company in India, Uber key competitor, basically,
Hmm.
has come out with electric bikes.
Oh wow. Okay.
Again, that's a 80,000 Indian rupee bike or something like that. I may have the price wrong, but it's a pretty exciting
Hmm.
development, in the sense that an Indian company is manufacturing, zero emissions bikes
Hmm.
for the Indian consumer, and that has an impact on its climate change commitments, right? Because at the
Right.
end of the
Yeah.
day, that's we need to get out or phase out the combustible engine. Um,
Hmm.
So I think on the Pakistani side, a lot more can be done. And I think your point about money and its incentives is a double-edged sword, in the sense that on one hand it's good. It brings expertise into the sector. It brings in more talent into the sector and the conversation. But I think the problem with some of this funding will be for countries like Pakistan, that we need to think about our own unique challenges and their solutions given the context of our own political economy. So, for example, if you look at just electric vehicles, four-wheeler electric vehicles like the e-trons or the Teslas are not what Pakistan needs. Pakistan needs solutions on two-wheelers and three-wheelers, and
Mm-hmm.
sort of the type of vehicle that is required by the 50,000 rupee a month earning family, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do they use for their transport, and how can we make their transportation options zero emissions?
Yeah.
That links to what is going on currently in Lahore with smog season, getting worse by the year, actually by the day now. And
Exactly.
again, we need to think about those things, right? Like, what is it that we need in our own context, and then go find the money for that. I
Yeah.
think the homework has to happen at home. No one from abroad, when I mean, I'm not saying, doesn't mean no one from abroad, but people from abroad may have solutions, but their
Mm.
perspective is never going to be as optimal, and their solution is never going to be as optimal for the
Yeah.
Pakistani context, as opposed to somebody within Pakistan thinking long and hard about what we need to do. And then I think that's a better use of resources and time and investment than otherwise.
I said, like that's a like a very good point, because sometimes it feels like Pakistan is a bit obsessed with adopting uh, international policies or international movements. So like you put it quite well that like I mean we don't need to look at electric vehicles like Teslas, etc., but we need to look at electric two wheelers, like something that like more and more Pakistanis can afford, like afford and so on. So speaking of in like investments and the International Climate Fund, are they like just throwing money in countries like Pakistan, or do you think Pakistan has the capacity to actually look at projects and then ask for investments? And do you think like investments will start to pour in
Look,
anytime soon?
think about it this way, Ahmed. If there is a commitment of 100 billion a year, right? That is going to be a pot of money that everybody from Timbuktu to East Timor to Pakistan will be chasing after.
Yeah.
And so some of that money obviously will automatically flow to countries like Pakistan, given their size and their importance and their sort of at being at risk of climate change, which UN
Mm,
reports and other reports have flatly pointed out. So automatically, some of it will flow. Now,
mm,
the extra bit that is needed, and there will be a lot of extra bit of funding that will be needed,
mm,
will depend on what policy frameworks, what institutions, what projects Pakistanis in Pakistan with the government, with the business sector come up with, right? So, for example, if we
mm,
know, and if you read the NEPRA reports, which is the energy regulator, we have significant challenges on the Pakistani side on our transmission and distribution side. That
mhm.
requires billions and billions of dollars of investment.
Yeah.
Already on the climate change pledges internationally, there is a lot of money that will go into energy distribution systems, both in terms of
Mm,
decentralized energy systems, but also developing energy systems that can deal with more renewable power. Because, as you may be aware, and some of your listeners may be aware, um, the type of energy grid that you need when you have a lot of solar and wind power, which fluctuates over time of day, is different than just a baseload capacity energy grid where coal power and LNG is being produced, right? So there's
yeah.
already that money. Now the question is, based on NEPRA recommendations, what is the grid modernization plan that the Pakistani
Mm,
state can come up with? And then go out and find the money and the technical expertise and the investment needed to
mm,
say, hey, based on
yeah.
our understanding and where our grid energy system is and how many more people we will have urbanizing in this country,
Mm,
here's how we intend to deal with this challenge. That's how
mm,
the extra money will flow. And this is
Exactly.
just one example, right? Then you have agricultural resiliency, investment in seeds, water
Mm.
systems. You have issues related to urbanization and urban development codes and the materials you will need to deal with extreme heat weather events, etc. You have then vehicles we already touched upon.
Yeah.
But it's something closer to your heart than most people in Pakistan, which is garbage.
Yeah.
All of this will create waste. How do
Right.
you even deal with that waste? Can you recycle that waste? Can you sustainably source this
Mm.
material? Whatever comes out of the system, can it be developed into a circular economy? There will be
Mm.
money for all of that. Now the question is, what are the things Pakistan wants to do? Um,
Mm.
and rather than wait for some messiah from the World Bank
Exactly.
or the ADB to come in, we need to think about कि भाई हमारी development, our development needs are X, Y, Z, and in
Mm.
order to fully benefit our own people, given their developmental level, given their needs, this is
Mm.
what we need to invest in. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a leapfrog economy opportunity. If
Mm.
we get this right, even in certain sectors, we're not going to get, nobody's going to get this right on everything. So if we identify 3 to 5 to 6 areas of investment, maybe we get it right in one. Maybe we only get it right in agricultural systems and mess up everything. Still better
Right.
than nothing. But we need to think about 6 things in order to get one right, right? That's how this is going to work out.
It's interesting that you keep giving me the perfect segues into my next question actually, because you talked about messing up in one sector and like hopefully getting it right in others. You also talked about waiting. They say we cannot exactly wait for a messiah like World Bank or something else to come in, and also like figuring out like for ourselves where we need to invest and where we need to actually push for improvement. So speaking of that, like, and speaking of garbage and everything, let's talk about like a little bit about say what's happening at the Gujarnala, right? So like there were urban floods and waste mismanagement, sewage mismanagement, and so on and so forth. And then the World Bank came in and they did allocate some funds and helped like Sindh government to try and deal with the issue. And in the end, the Sindh government ended up destroying most of the house and basically making a lot of people homeless without being able to or without having the willingness to give alternate housing to them. So that's basically created an issue of climate migration. First, it was urban floods, but now there's several people that are homeless. So sitting at the Atlantic Council and having that kind of insight, do you think Pakistan is actually dealing with its problems of climate change properly, or do you think that they're just chasing that concept, or they're just chasing the funds and aren't really and messing everything else up?
I mean, look, let me use an analogy to sort of describe my thoughts on this, right? If I give you a wonderful recipe to make a pizza, um, in order for you to do that, there are at least three key things that need to work along with the recipe. One, you have the right set of ingredients that are actually good quality to make a good pizza. Two, you have the right set of tools to make the pizza, including a very good oven that can give you high temperatures.
Right.
And three, you need sort of practice to do this. First time around, you're not
Mhm.
going to be able to stretch the dough or spin it the way a master pizza maker
Right.
in Napoli would do,
Yeah.
right? Um,
Mm.
it's the same in this instance, in the sense that um, the Gujar Nala, I haven't even looked at the project, but I'm just speculating here. The project on paper may sound very good. And
Mm.
its impact may be very good, and a bunch of economists sitting in a room modeling this out may have said the cost benefit analysis is in favor. We know
Yeah.
there are issues related to relocating people and we'll get it done, etc. But then you run into the harsh reality on the ground,
Mm.
which is that Pakistan and its bureaucratic system and its political economy by nature is kleptocratic. It
Yeah.
does not take into account the impact of people or at the very bottom ends of the pyramid. And it is very, very, very much lacking in empathy for the
Yeah.
poor and the downtrodden. When you
Mm,
meet that, a good project like that into the reality that I just explained, things that you described are bound to happen. Um,
mm,
the only solution in my mind, looking at things like this, is that you need more empowered local governments in an era of climate change. Why do I say
mm,
that? I say that because a lot of these issues that you will begin to see, and you're already seeing with urban flooding, with
mm,
related to crop failures, water
mm,
management issues, they all vary based on the region that you live in, right? So, for
mm.
example, the extreme heat weather event challenge for Karachi, with its slums in Liari and
Yes,
Gujarnala and
under,
Sorabkot, is very different than the extreme weather risk to Thatta, right,
yeah,
which is rural
or Lahore.
and or
Yeah,
Lahore, right? So
yeah.
if we don't have local governments that are empowered, where communities can have a voice and say, look, here's our challenge, we're seeing things on the ground,
Mm,
we're always going to run into very terrible problems on execution. Um,
mm,
the other thing that I sort of think of is that when we look at this type of funding from the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank, etc.,
mm,
if the flow is directly to the Sindh government without input from the people of Karachi, for example, in this particular instance, but let's
mm.
say this is
Yeah,
in Thatta or a project in Hub Balochistan or whatever, it will be even worse, because at least Karachi mein media hai, people can raise a voice and things like that. Imagine what it would be like in a disconnected part of the country that's on the periphery. So I think
yeah.
we need to empower people to have a voice, tolerate dissent, and at times this dissent may actually slow down the implementation of what you and I may think are important projects for climate change mitigation and dealing with the
Mm,
larger macro challenge. But if we don't empower these local
mm,
communities, and not only empower them to have a voice, but
yeah,
empower them for them to think about their own challenge. I remember this very early, like when I was
yeah,
growing up. My mom still makes fun of this, right? Like, and again, these are topics closer to your heart. She would joke, we grew up using steel containers and cloth bags
yeah.
for buying stuff and things like that. Then all of you guys gave us plastic, saying that this is better, and now you're telling us to go back to what our grandparents already taught us to use, right? And it's the
That's
same thing, like, because we did not empower these local communities, we lost the
yeah,
understanding that with these what we would in very crude terms call like illiterate people who don't know what this is about. Like, no, there are commonsensical things that rural people actually are better at common sense, particularly common sense related to climate change and the environment, than we give
right.
them credit for. And if we give them a voice, we will quickly
Yeah,
find out that a lot of the things we're doing today, they actually knew 20 years ago that these were bad. And they tried to resist, but they weren't allowed
yeah,
to have that voice that would have ended up making this problem less problematic than what it is.
yeah. Like what I've noticed is that there's like a spectrum of people that know about like the impact of climate change and how to deal with it. Some of them know what the impact is, but they don't exactly know how to deal with it. Others have already been like because they're closer to nature and everything. They already are living a life that's pretty safe, but at the same time they don't really understand what the impact might be of climate change and like how to counter it
Yeah.
essentially.
Like, I'll give you an
But
example. Sorry to cut you off. Like, but like, I'll give
yeah,
you an example of exactly this thing, right? Like, when I was growing up in Karachi, in Doraji, right? We used to have geese that would walk around the streets in that neighborhood, and we would feed these geese
okay,
because Karachi was still greener than what it is, today,
right, yeah, like I
right?
can't
And
imagine geese walking.
yeah, they would migrate, and my nana actually explained to me, okay, where do they come from? They would sort of in certain parts of this year, they would
Right.
sort of migrate and nest in Hill Park, and from Hill Park they would come
Okay.
down into the
Mm,
Raji and then sort of walk around, because the city was still more conducive to wildlife at that time. Now the
mm.
development started happening in Karachi, particularly that part of the city
De-
where high
Development.
rises
Development.
development, yes, in quotation marks, that development basically led to commercial development, high rises, use of concrete, etc. All of the nature around in these communities that supported these geese went away. So the geese went
Mm.
away. But
Yeah.
my nana, my nani, people who lived in those communities saw that happening. They actually
Mm.
wanted to resist this, but there was no system for them to do
Mm.
what now we call, urban development with, man-made forests and things like that. Miyawaki
Yeah.
forests in the
Yeah.
Pakistani parlance have become really popular because of this. But 30 years ago, local communities realized the challenge. They wanted to guard their, nature
Mm.
within their communities, but there was no structure to do that.
Yeah. Why do
That's
you think
what
that
I
is
mean.
though? Why were there? Like if there were, if were there not any guidelines? So like, sorry, like that that point distracted me a little bit from from my next question. But why do you think they were not able to resist that? Because I mean, they saw it, not your Tana, like himself, of course, but like the Pakistani, government or community or people who saw these changes. And do you think that there are structures like that existing now? Like, do these structures exist now? And also, like when you mentioned that, like World Bank funding, etc., and everything, and empowering the local communities. Um, I'm not sure if they did. So do you think that there needs to be an um, like a structure within these organizations as well, that like until unless you engage with the locals or the the most impacted population of the area, we will not fund you.
Well, see, that then puts things at risk of making a checklist item, right? Then let's play this out. If the World Bank says you have to do that, the Sindh government can come back and say we hosted 5 community town halls to get input, and we've got their input. Here's their input, and the project is moving forward. Now,
uh,
how will the World Bank know what these town halls were, how transparent
right.
this was, blah blah blah? Every layer of process that you add on top of it is actually gonna take that pot
Mm,
of money away from the actual development and towards compliance
mm,
functions, right? So there's the problem
uh,
there. The work has to happen at the Pakistani political system level.
mm,
And so that aligns with your point of like why could the community not resist this? Because Karachi does not have a local government system, especially at that point in time did not have one. There was no
mm,
representation, there was no way to do
mm,
these things, right? So when the KMC or whatever decided to pass change of zoning laws that says, this is now commercial territory,
mm,
builders came in who were colluding with the political
uh,
establishment to buy up this land. They were offering decent prices, so people sold them, even though they did not want to, because or what else could they have done, right? So I think, again, that system at the community level is linked to local government challenges in Pakistan. And my view, at least, is that the climate change emergency is not going to be effectively dealt with so long as there is no local representation of communities in Pakistan's political
mm,
system.
mm,
That is a broader point, just connected to everything, including economic development and climate change. But I
mm,
think we have to appreciate the fact that this is a very core issue in Pakistan's political system. And so long as
uh,
we don't talk about it and empower communities to demand change,
mm.
everything is going to be problematic in terms of its solutions.
Yeah, like I completely agree with that as well. That like there isn't much representation, and whatever political, like whatever talk there is, it seems like it's more of a political, like talking point or checklist at this point in time as well. Okay, oh yeah, let's talk about the environment, let's talk about climate change, and hopefully there will be a movement soon, because I believe that even everything, even politics and economics and finances, everything basically stems from environmental issues, or stems from nature, because I mean that's where food comes from, that's where oil and gas and fossil fuels come from, that's where water comes from, that's like I mean it's basically nature, and we finances and politics and everything is basically a structure, like a system to manage that, and which unfortunately we've completely mismanaged at this point in time. But so let me ask you, in your personal capacity and as your role as the director at the Pakistan Initiative at the Atlantic Council, um, how do you see your role within this framework? We've been discussing these. So, are you engaging with government officials in Pakistan? Are you engaging with the Department of State in the US? Are you engaging with, say, the World Bank and direct and helping them figure out where to invest invest in Pakistan, or or what are you doing in terms of promoting dialogue and diplomacy
Yeah,
in
no, that's a
within
good
this?
question, and I'm in week two of this new role. So I think
Right.
what you
Then what will
describe is
you be
coming.
doing?
Yes, that all of those things that you talked about are things that we want to do at the Atlantic Council as part of the Pakistan
Right.
Initiative. In fact, just a few weeks ago, before I joined, the Pakistan Initiative hosted a group of experts to talk about Pakistan's water scarcity problem. And we put
Okay.
out an issue brief on based on the discussions that were held in a closed door meeting with these experts. We published it, we shared it. It was actually covered in the Pakistani media as well.
Got
So
it.
we know the goal from my and the initiative's perspective is that we want to convene experts on a whole host of issues, including climate change. But climate change is too broad, right? So within that, there's water, agriculture, energy systems. Those are the three in particular that I want to prioritize. Um, Convene the
Which one?
experts.
Sorry, could you repeat that? Which ones did you want to prioritize again?
So the three priorities within the climate change bucket are energy systems, agriculture,
Yeah.
and water. So convene the experts, do the research where it's needed. But my thinking on this, and our team at the council agrees with this thinking as well. There is a lot of research, and a lot of times, what initiatives like the Pakistan initiative often make the mistake they make is that they duplicate research that's already happened. So we want to avoid that. The way we think we can avoid that is we can identify the experts, bring them. Thankfully, because of the pandemic world, everyone loves to get on Zoom. Bring them into Zoom conversations privately. Get a sense from them about, like, based on their research, other research that they may be aware of, what are things that are important to point out, what are things we already know, what are things that we need to know more of, and what's the broad agenda of dealing with, let's say, the water crisis in Pakistan. That translates into a public document as an issue brief that says, look, experts convene, this is what they think should be the priorities, this is where the gaps are, and then we can do in-depth research on the gaps that they identify. Right, so we want to build on top of things, not duplicate. That's important. And then obviously through that the conversation can begin at a public level, whether it's with the State Department, with the ADB, with the World Bank, with other private sector investors globally that are looking at climate change investments in resiliency, etc. But more importantly, I think the conversation has to focus on Pakistan's political elites and the average Pakistani, because if we do not make the average Pakistani, through conversations like this that you're hosting on the environmental, right, understand the challenge, understand potential pathways to solution, we will not empower them to do their own thinking. And if we don't empower them to do their own thinking, then whatever reforms get implemented will be implemented in a way that will be disconnected from reality. So we need to, when we talk about, I talked about the why local communities need to be empowered in the political system. I think we also, as researchers, as sort of people looking to influence the conversation, have to empower local communities through our conversations as well. In the sense that
Right.
if 100 more people in Karachi are more adept at understanding why urban flooding is happening and why digging a trench in DHA is not going to solve your problem, that's a
Right.
starting point, because those 100 can then convince 1,000. Right, and if we don't do that, then the problem around policy not being implemented effectively, or even forget about implementation being drafted effectively, is always going to be a gap, and that'll always make the problem worse, not
Yeah.
better.
Huh. I agree. So, are there any projects that you like? I mean, you already mentioned that water, energy systems, and agriculture, three things within the climate change bucket that you're focusing on. So, are there any upcoming discussions, other than the one that you've already had, or um, like are you still trying to figure out the framework at this point in time? Are there any concrete? Yeah.
We don't have something super concrete, but I'll just give you my thinking on this, right? Because I'm building out that framework in terms of what the near-term thrust of the conversation should be. So, for
Mm,
example, something I'm personally very passionate about is the fact that we have to clean up miles traveled, kilometers traveled in Pakistani communities, meaning that
mm,
Lahore smog crisis would not be half as bad if we had a cleaner energy, a cleaner transport system. Not
yeah.
only a transport system that is, has more metro buses and trains and things like that, but also a transport system where the individual is traveling kilometers on electric vehicles, two and three
Yeah.
wheelers, right?
Hmm.
To me, that then links to I'm passionate about this for three main reasons. One is that it it creates new economy, jobs, and investment in Pakistan. What do I mean by that? That if you bring in electric vehicles into the Pakistani urban environment, all of a sudden the manufacturing and assembly of these vehicles will be new economy in the sense that these are new materials coming in, new technical expertise, new investments into allied industries. You then get also energy infrastructure that is capable of charging vehicle fleets, that is directly connected with cleaning up these miles.
Hmm.
And then three, you make the urban environment a lot more pleasant to live in,
Yeah.
in the broader sense, right? So I think those are the types of things that I want to have conversations around. And again, bring in experts, bring in their point of view, including from the government, and say, look,
Mm,
there are ways to leapfrog, in Pakistan. It's a big opportunity, and we need to think about things that are more relevant to the Pakistani developmental
mm,
case than the shiny thing that might be the most cool looking conversation
yeah.
on YouTube or on the Wall Street Journal pages, right? So that's one. I think the second sort of thing that I'm thinking about increasingly on the agricultural side, and again I'm passionate about, is we and you may already know this as well, some of your listeners as well, that we are still using agricultural techniques of 100 years ago, of flood irrigation and canal canal driving water into or tube wells pumping water up from the aquifer.
Yeah.
That's a 100-year-old technology, and we need to modernize and empower our farmers to be able to use modern technologies like drip irrigation that not only will save a lot of water, but it's actually good for the environment, because then the excess water can be used to refill our aquifers that
Yeah.
currently we're drawing water from, right? So again, having experts come in, talk about this. I don't know anything about this. It's not a topic just I'm interested in. So that's another one that we need to have conversations around. And then the third is mainly related to decentralized energy systems. You
Yeah.
mentioned gas and the shortage of gas every winter. There's two ways to solve this, right? One is that we build more LNG terminals, invest more in extraction of Pakistan's own natural gas resources, and build
Yeah.
pipelines and drive these pipelines to communities and give them gas and etc. That's the old economy way of thinking, in my view. The new economy way of thinking is, well, how can we get microgrid set up in these communities where they have reliable access to electricity produced through solar, wind, small water, hydel power, etc., where it's carbon neutral or zero carbon emission. We will obviously through that need better grid investments at the microgrid level with battery storage. That battery storage requires new materials, new industries to be set up, even at the very basic level of being able to have a workforce that can repair and set up these microgrids, right? That's a jobs opportunity, that's an investment opportunity, that's a community empowerment opportunity, in the sense that all of a sudden these small towns and villages
Mm,
can have clean energy and
yeah.
development occurring within them, so that they don't migrate to Karachi and Lahore or Faisalabad, because these urban cities are also at a stretch, right? So those are things that are all linked. Now we need to have a multidisciplinary
Mm,
approach to all of these conversations and say, look, there are ways to tackle very real challenges with a climate change lens, but that climate change lens that has an impact on foreign investment, manufacturing, jobs, cleaning up the environment, all of those things that we all know are problems, that are problems outside of climate change as it is. And I think we need to think holistically about all of these issues.
Mm. So yeah, so all of those points are like like are very valid. Like like electric vehicles are directly related with energy systems, and of course, so is like creating microgrids, and of course, like using modern technology and everything for agriculture as well. So yeah, I guess like we need to push for a better understanding within the not just the Pakistani government, of course, but also the communities. And from what I understand, that's what you're trying to that's what you will be trying to do. Like I also wanted to ask one thing, because like climate change is not just a like a countrywide issue, or like it's a global issue, and at the same time it's also a regional problem. So considering that you're the director of the Pakistan initiative at Atlantic Council South Asia, right? So are you interacting with neighboring countries as well such as India and Afghanistan and Iran and so on? Because you mentioned water shortage in Pakistan being close to your heart. Um, a lot of times, Pakistanis like to point at India for that. And there's one thing like something called cross border river relations and everything as well, right? And there's all sorts of the Indus Water Treaty, and there are like people like they also claim that the next wars and everything will be on water instead of oil. So, are you do you interact with other South Asian nations as well, regional nations as well, and try to reach a regional policy too?
Well, so I mean, look, Pakistanis look at India on the water challenge, and Indians would say they look at China for the water challenge, right? I mean,
Yeah,
the water originates in the Himalayas, and so
yeah,
that's a shared treasure. I would argue. To me, that's
yeah.
a shared treasure of the people of the subcontinent, and
I
not
agree.
only just the subcontinent of the Asian civilization, if you want to broaden it out, right? And we need to cherish it. We need to protect it as a community
Mm.
across borders. I think my conversations, because I'm in the South Asia Center, obviously occur with experts who look at India, what's going on in India, in Bangladesh, in
Mhm.
Afghanistan in particular. Those are the three countries that we follow closely, and we have experts that I learn from. Um, I think from a broader sort of regional approach, right? I think the Indus Water Treaty is living proof that no matter what happens in India-Pakistan relations, certain things can hold up the test
Yeah.
of time. Obviously, there are issues. Everything will always have issues, and these issues will be exacerbated given the problem of climate change. But I think there are certain things we can collectively work together at the government to government level, but at the community societal level as well. For example, when we look at the challenge of smog season in Lahore or the plains of the
Mm.
Punjab, it's the same in Delhi. You look at the conversation in terms of the Supreme Court of India wrapping up the Delhi government versus the Lahore Court, High Court in Lahore. It's the same set of problems, right? You need to
Yeah.
shut down schools. Our children are getting sick.
Yeah.
And you know what? Smog doesn't have borders. The line of control and the artillery we have over there is not going to stop the smog
Exactly.
from
Yeah.
permeating these borders, right? So we need to think about this. I mean, my the way I think about this at a very 50,000 foot level is that if we can open the Kartarpur corridor and enable cultural contact, religious contact with across the border with communities that have shared interests on both sides. Maybe that's a building block where, maybe just thinking out loud, it's a random idea that just came to my mind. Maybe there should be a smog
Mhm.
summit around the Kartarpur
I like
events as
that. I
well,
like that
right? On the
idea.
sidelines of the Kartarpur religious festival, right? Why
Right,
not?
right,
Because
right.
these are the same people who are impacted at the local community level. They're coming, they're having engagement across the border. Why not use that as an opportunity to build something on a shared objective around clean air and the environment around the people? Maybe it'll happen someday. Maybe I'll write it down and see what my friends at the South Asia Center think about this random idea. um, but I think those are the ways in which we can take small steps in terms of shared objectives. But I think at the end of the day, and there are also at the end of the day, there are lessons to be learned, right? Like I
Yeah.
remember one of the things that they did in Gujarat was that, because of higher and higher temperatures in the canals, the water is evaporating at a faster clip. So one of the projects they did was basically cover the canals with solar panels. So all of a sudden, not only are you saving water because it's under the shade, but you're also producing clean energy through solar
Mm.
panels on top of these canals, right? It's interesting. I don't know what the scale of this investment was. It was an interesting pilot project when I read about it. So
Mm.
maybe we can learn some things related to that, right? Maybe
Mm.
the Indus Valley aquifer goes
Mm.
under the line of control. So we talked about smog going
Exactly.
over the
Yeah.
line of control. The water goes under the line of
Good.
control. We all, the people
Right.
of the Punjab, and Sindh and Rajasthan, etc., need to come
Mm.
together to talk about, this is again a shared resource. We can't just keep
Mm.
pumping water out of these tube wells. How do we deal with that? What do our communities think? What are
Mm.
interesting things that maybe we're doing on our side of the border that perhaps the other
Mm.
side can learn, or what they're doing that we can learn? So I
Mm.
think, again, in those areas, given the political challenges, given the relationship challenges, I still think there are small conversations that can happen.
Mm.
And our goal is to, if at all, catalyze those conversations, and where we can't, because of whatever reasons, at least use the
Mm.
expertise within the South Asia Center to inform the Pakistan initiatives work. So again, so that we're not duplicating or rebuilding the wheel, so to speak. That if somebody's
Right.
already done that, why not look at good examples and try to replicate them?
Right. Okay, so it's been almost an hour, and thank you for your time, and like for great ideas like using the Kartarpur corridor, or cross the cross border to discuss these issues. I actually like that, like like going above and going under, and like we just talk about like stuff on land. So from what I understand, you'll basically be trying to uh, engage with experts from the region, from the various countries, and trying to advise organizations and countries on what they need to work on, and hopefully basically suggest where the money go. Like, am I mistaken, or like
Well,
is that what's
Well, it's
very
less about
quickly?
it's less about advice, and I see it less about advice and more about empowering people to make their decisions.
Right. Oh
So
yes,
the
that's
output
true.
of the research that we do, the conversations we have, both public and private, the goal is to, show people. I mean, number one, in Washington D.C., that Pakistan is a lot more than counterterrorism and terrorism challenges, which are
Right.
obviously there. But we need to look at Pakistan as a diverse country of 220 plus million people, with a young population, with issues that are pretty much the same as issues that maybe a community in Alabama is
Mm.
facing with climate change, for example, in sort of the context of this conversation, right? So that's one. Two is to use our platform to, at the influencer level, at the elite government or policymaker level,
Mm.
add nuance to the conversation and say, well, what is our blueprint for reforms in climate change or energy systems or agriculture? There are 10,000 things we can have, fill in the
Mm.
blank there. We can't do
Mm.
everything. So again, what are the priorities that we want? I shared some of that with you. So it's to have that conversation and provide
Right.
input to that. But three, and I think that's the long tail impact that, at least we are looking to accomplish, is that how do we empower Pakistani communities both within and outside
Mm.
Pakistan, particularly the under 35 Pakistani who's going to live with this challenge for a long, long
Mm.
time. I was just reading today, somebody sent me a research that shows that the average Lahori loses about 6 years of their life, given due to the P2.5
Mm.
emissions and particle levels in the smog. Excuse me. So
Bless you.
if 6 years are being shaved off of your life, and my friend's child in Lahore says that after a rainy day, the child looks up and says, "Daddy, look, blue sky." That's a very
Yeah.
sad upbringing for a child who doesn't get to see good sunsets in winter, which I think
Exactly.
you cherish that
Mm.
memory. We all remember playing
Yeah.
cricket around Maghrib and the beautiful sunsets we used to have in Karachi and
Yeah.
Lahore and other parts of the country. We
Yeah.
don't see that anymore. It's sad. Um,
Yeah.
so again, we know that people know that at a common sense level. And so
Yeah.
the goal of the Pakistan initiative is to leverage that common sense and say, look, here's actually how you should think about systems level change related
Yeah.
to the challenges you see, whether it's on climate change, economy, etc. So again,
Mm.
those are the three sort of in broad strokes, the
Right.
goals of the program.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Uzair, for your time and for your suggestions and for like the work that you're doing at the Atlantic Council. Um, and that should actually be the end of our conversation because we've gone over by about 5 minutes. But I very quickly wanted to ask a random question that came into my mind. Well, not a random question, but perhaps something to think about when you mentioned Pakistanis inside and outside of Pakistan, and when when the overseas Pakistani comes to mind, the conversation usually lies on remittances or voting rights these days. So speaking of remittances, so how much is the Pakistani diaspora over there interested in what's happening as far as climate change is concerned in Pakistan? That's one. And two, speaking of remittances, how what percentage of those remittances do you think goes in basically helping the Pakistanis living in Pakistan to deal with the challenge of climate change? For example, I know that when my mother, for example, sometimes sends money from the UAE. It's also about, oh, अच्छा filter एक वो हवा का filter वो air filter ले लेना, air purifier ले लेना, and so on, या masks लेना. So do you think there's a there's a certain percentage, or is that something that perhaps you could look into, or
I
economists could
mean,
listen to as well?
I
Right.
mean, to your first question, I don't know how interested they are. What I do know is that the American Pakistan Foundation did some fantastic research a few months ago that looked at news sources for the diaspora.
Mm.
And about 35%, if I remember it correctly, of the diaspora in the survey uses WhatsApp as a means of plugging into what's
Oh,
going on in Pakistan, which is a very dangerous, stat for me and concerning stat to me that that's the information source. So they are in. It's very clear from that survey that they are interested
mm,
um, in what's going on. I think
right.
that research also showed that there's a generational divide in what they're interested in when it comes to Pakistan.
Mm.
So, for example, for older boomer sort of generation Pakistanis who've been here since the 70s, 80s, for example, they're much more concerned about corruption in Pakistan, which tends to align
Mm.
with sort of the WhatsApp getting messages and other beliefs that they may have about
Yeah.
Pakistan. With no, I'm not passing judgment, but that's what they're interested
Yeah,
in.
no, no.
At the
Yeah.
younger generation level, people like you and I, or even younger than you and I, are
Mm.
more interested in things like innovation and entrepreneurship
Mm.
and economic development in Pakistan, which then I think opens the door for us on the climate change side, at least in my view.
Mm.
Um, in terms of the flow of remittances, it's very hard to tell. What we do know from data, again, from the Pakistan Bureau of Statistics, for example, is that in certain households, particularly in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, in rural
Mm.
households in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, foreign remittances beef up to 12 to 15% of a household's income. And
Mm.
these are blue collar workers in the Gulf primarily, right? So these are
Right.
not people like me sending money to their parents, for example.
Yeah.
But
Mm.
obviously that money then bleeds into education, building a home
Mm.
in
Mm.
Lahore. It may bleed into getting a new air filter
Mm.
in the winter season or before winter season. I know, for example, of a few friends who sent extra money to their parents ahead of the winter so that they could buy a electric water heater and an electric
Yeah,
stove
or
because of
gas
the gas
cylinders,
shortage.
etc.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think it does bleed in. That would require to fully understand the way in which that happens. It would require a national survey, which
Mm,
I think the Pakistan initiative is not only is not capable of doing at this point. Maybe sometime in the
yeah.
future we can partner with somebody on the ground to do
Mm,
it. But it's a very good question. I think we should look at the way this remittance flow, comes into Pakistan and then bleeds it or finds its way into the larger economy. What is
mm,
it funding? What type of purchases
mm,
is it funding? Because then that links to, how can we channel this investment or this flow of funds more effectively? For example, sticking to this same thought, um, if we know from that data, let's say that people are sending money over to their families to invest in electric heaters and off-grid solar panels, battery, etc., because they want cleaner energy or cheaper energy, not cleaner, cheaper energy for their families. Then perhaps through the Roshan digital account, you could have a financing mechanism for these types of purchases, right, on the consumer durable side. Instead of allowing a car purchase, maybe we ought to allow subsidized purchases or financing of off-grid solar solutions, for example. I'm just thinking out loud here, right? But
yeah,
yeah, definitely that can then bleed into the climate change challenge of Pakistan. And again, to your point about finding sources of funding, right?
yeah,
That if you channel that type of remittance flow funding into cleaner appliances, cleaner power, distributed power, and things like that, all of a sudden you're upgrading your economy versus just putting out more emitting cars on the roads of Lahore, which is already choking with smog.
yeah. So yeah. So these are great ideas for the future, and like I'm sure that you have your work cut out for you at the Pakistan initiative. There's a lot for you to do, and I'm glad that you are there to do it because you are you seem to have a good grasp of how things work and how intersectional things are as well, and I would imagine that like you'll be able to bring about real change and like have start real conversations. So yeah, so thank you, Uzair, once again for coming on to the environmental. We've gone up a bit by about 12 minutes, but it's always great, talking to, and then there's still a lot to talk about as well. So perhaps maybe 6 months or 3 months, like from now, when you've been here, like when you've been at the Atlantic Council for more than 2 weeks, we could touch base once again and see and discuss if you were able to figure out like how much of the remittance is going to countering effects of climate change.
Yeah. No, thanks for having me, and thanks for having this conversation through the environmental. I think you're doing great stuff in terms of again raising the level of the discourse around these topics is, I think, the starting point, and we can go a long way
Mm.
from there. I know you're passionate about these topics in particular, and you're doing amazing work. So keep that up. I think it's a again it's a long tail challenge, right? It's not going to, if we took over 200 years of industrialization to come to the climate change disaster that we're experiencing now, it's not going to be solved in 5, 10, 15, even 20 years. So we need to stay at it,
Yeah,
be patient, and I think not
yeah,
lose hope, because there will be a lot of moments in this disaster, in general in Pakistan, across the board, where
mm,
it's easier to lose faith and lose hope and be cynical. And some
yeah,
cynicism is definitely warranted, but I think you and I, and others like us, can continue to tell people that there's possibilities of change, and here's how we do it.
yeah. Yeah, and that's the purpose of starting this conversation, to basically um, have some section of the media actually talk about these issues. So once again, thank you so much for coming on, Uzair, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Then
Thanks for
have a
having
good
me.
one. So yeah, thank you for listening in, those who did, and thank you for liking our, the conversation. Unfortunately, we weren't able to engage questions right now because like we went over by about 15 minutes. I guess I need to time my discussions better. It's just like the conversation, when kept taking interesting turns. So please do like our Facebook page, environmental.org, our YouTube channel, the environmental, our Instagram, environmental.org, and our Twitter as well, environment.org. So that we get more and more engagements, so that we get more and more comments from you. I would really appreciate that, and so that we could keep the conversation going, because we need your input, like for that purpose. Thank you once again, and do tune in next week as well. We have another guest coming up, Ghalia Nasir, who will be talking about the donut economy on Thursday at 7 p.m. But we will update you on on our Facebook page and on our Twitter, and uh, you know, and when the next one is going to happen. Thank you.